Hey friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie, and today I have a super sweet collection to share from Prism Parade called Sugar Rush. As you can see, this is a 7-piece lineup of springtime neon creams, which offer a perfect pop of color for anyone tired of spring pastels. I'll share more info on when these launch, as well as my thoughts for the end of the video after comparisons. For now, let me just show you the swatches. The first polish we have is Watermelon Crush, which I would describe as a neon coral. This is just that quintessential summer coral kind of shade for me, and I would say it's surprisingly picking up color accurate for the most part, where I would say it's very coral, but it does lean a little bit more on like the orange leaning side as opposed to a corally pink, if that makes sense. But it does have a very warm pinky undertone. The formula was pretty nice. It was really pigmented and I got decent coverage, but for some reason I just kind of kept missing the sides of my nails, so I got some bare spots there, which you'll pretty much notice throughout the rest of the video. But yeah, I got really nice coverage in 2 coats. The neon orange in the collection is called Push Pop, and while this unfortunately is not picking up color accurate on my phone, this is so color accurate to how I remember that orange Push Pop color, where it's not too light or yellow that it's tangerine, but it's not a traffic cone orange either. It's a little bit lighter than that, and I think I would say with a slightly warm, almost peachy kind of undertone. But yeah, like I mentioned on camera, it unfortunately is picking up like a very bright carrot or mid-tone orange, so this is actually a little bit more whitened in real life. And I would say the formula was pretty similar to the last shade, where I had some unevenness on that first coat, but I got it opaque in 2. Then we have Banana Taffy, which is the neon yellow, and this is what I would call your typical highlighter yellow color. It's very neon, and this one had a slightly less creamy formula, so it was leaning ever so slightly on the crelly side. Still incredibly pigmented though, as you can see on the first coat, but I could see some more dark spots or unevenness in real life easier than what you can see on camera. So depending on your nail length and your application, you might need a 3rd coat for this. I personally left it in 2 coats because I found it to be even enough and opaque enough for me, but there is that crelly squish. And the neon green in the lineup is called Sour Sucker, and I have a hard time describing the shade of green because it's kind of in between a light and medium shade. I don't think it's light enough to be called a lime green, but yeah, I just don't know what to call it. It's just a gorgeous and a very bright color, just as vibrant and neon as the rest, and I would say that this one, formula-wise, was most similar to the last shade, where it's slightly more on the crelly side, a little bit more noticeably sheer on that first coat, a little bit uneven, and while it did build up beautifully in 2 coats for me, likely because I went in with a little bit of a thicker 2nd coat to really even things out, I could see this one being another potential 3-coater. Then we have Cotton Candy, which I would almost describe as a neon sky blue. And I usually associate sky blues with a much lighter hue, but I feel like if you were to look up at the sky on a bright spring day, this is the shade of blue that you would see. I thought this one had a really great creamy kind of formula. I know I still have those problem areas on the very sides of my nail, so while it might not look super even on the first coat, it did even out really beautifully, and again just felt more creamy and smooth to apply. So I feel like the pigmentation and coverage on this one lends itself to be a solid 2-coater. And yeah, while this color isn't exactly what I think of a neon blue, it definitely is still super bright. Next we have Gummy Bear, which is the neon purple, and I found this one to be super buttery smooth, so it felt like the best formula for me, which was just extra satisfying to apply. Definitely another solid 2-coater like the last shade, although on the first coat here I did happen to get a little hair in the brush or something, so it might not look, completely perfect, but aside from that, it felt perfect. I guess to nitpick it a little bit though, there are some itty bitty teeny tiny little dark spots in here, which I only really noticed during my live swatch portion and not my full hand swatch photos. And rounding out the collection, we have Shortcake, which is the neon pink. This one was so intense, just your typical neon pink that kind of reminded me of like an old Barbie Jeep toy that I used to have. I found the formula on this to be really similar to either the blue or the coral, where it's very pigmented on that first coat with some slight unevenness on the edges of my nail, but it built up to be fully opaque in just two. And to absolutely no one's surprise, this was my favorite from the lineup. And here is my full hand swatch collage of the Sugar Rush collection. So apologies I couldn't get these shots like in motion, but I was running out of light and wanted to get this video up right away. Even with these being taken in more indirect lighting, you can see they are just so eye-searingly bright and neon. So I love the color payoff that you get with these in just the two coats, but formula-wise, even though they might look all completely opaque, the yellow and the green definitely were a bit more crelly leaning, so you could see some more unevenness there. Moving on to comparisons, we're starting with Watermelon Crush and looking at it next to Cirque's Boozy Brunch, which I believe came out in last year's Vice collection, as well as ILNP's Summer, both of which are these neon coral kind of shades. Summer is definitely the darkest though, so I would say Boozy Brunch is the closest, not an exact dupe though. I would say that one is slightly more on that reddish coral side, while Watermelon Crush is a little bit more orange. Next for Push Pop, I wanted to first show these next to some ILNP neon oranges. So we have Turbocharged on the left and Sunny Days on the right. And you can clearly see these are not dupes. Turbocharged is what I would call a neon traffic cone orange, while Sunny Days is a lighter, almost peachy orange. For reference, here's Push Pop next to Mooncat's Acidic from their Technicolor Dreams collection. That's not described as a neon orange, but either way, it's a much more yellow leaning orange. I think a closer orange would be something like Mooncat's Poems for a Harvest Moon, which is, you know, acrylic. It has a pink shimmer. It's not a dupe by any means. Even though they might look kind of similar in the bottle, on the nail, it's a totally different story. The Mooncat just looks darker, like a richer, almost pumpkin orange. So yeah, Prism is definitely a neon, but I think it's just closer to this shade of orange. Also for reference, I wanted to show Holo Taco's Oh My Gourd, which is another bright kind of carrot orange, I would say, or maybe a pumpkin orange is a better color descriptor for Holo Taco. So yeah, similar to the last shade, I feel like they kind of look similar in the bottle, but then on the nail, there is just no comparison. I sadly don't have this one in my collection anymore because I'm pretty sure it faded, but I think the closest was something like Dimension Nails Soldierfish, which is a neon orange, although that one is a little bit more peachy. Next for Banana Taffy, we of course are going to be looking at it next to Cirque's Electric Daisy, but I also wanted to show it next to ILNP's Squeeze Me, even though that one is a jelly formula, so it is a lot more sheer in comparison, but in the bottle it kind of looks like the same color, but there really is no comparison when it comes to on the nail. But Cirque's Electric Daisy is definitely the closest. It's not an exact dupe because it's slightly more green leaning, almost like a tennis ball color as opposed to a true highlighter yellow. And speaking of tennis ball colors, I also wanted to show this quickly next to ILNP's Playlist, which is even more green than Electric Daisy. Next for Sour Sucker, I have Cirque's Cream and Thirsty to compare, which are two of the Vice greens that I still have in my collection. Cream is a little bit lighter and more yellow leaning, but not as yellow as Banana Taffy. And while my bottle of Thirsty is unfortunately faded, the original color definitely has this kind of blue undertone to the green. From ILNP, I figured I could quickly show this next to Bottoms Up, which is from their Neon Cream collection, but it's not quite the same shade. I think the closer shade of green is ILNP's Sour Apple, but that is a jelly formula, so similar to Banana Taffy and Squeeze Me. These look extremely similar, almost exact dupes in the bottle, but they are different on the nail. I think the closest shade to a dupe is Cirque's Kushy, which is another of their Vice shades. Sadly, don't have that one in my collection to compare directly, but from what I remember, Sour Sucker is extremely similar to that one. Next, for cotton candy, the only neon blue I technically have in my collection is Cirque's Sky High, because again, that's one of their Vice shades. I know they had also come out with a shade called Mile High Club, but that one was even darker, and yeah, you can see that Sky High is too dark to compare to cotton candy. Some other blues that I thought were extremely similar were Crack's Fresh Pedicure and Dimension Nails Blue Morpho Butterfly. I don't remember if both of these were described as neon blues, but they definitely look extremely similar in the bottle, but then once we see it on the nail, you can tell a difference where the Dimension Nails is a bit darker, like several shades darker, I would say, while the Cracked is a little bit closer, but not as vibrant or neon. The only other blue in my collection this kind of reminded me of was Olive Ave's Xiala, which is an ocean blue cream. Again, kind of looking similar in the bottle, but on the nail, Xiala is a little bit lighter, more white based. This is what I would think of as a sky blue. Then for Gummy Bear, I was clearly struggling. First, I pulled out ILNP's High Score, which is a much more blue-toned purple, but it is the closest purple that I have in my collection to Gummy Bear. I think something like China Glaze's Left My Heart in Havana was gonna be a little closer, but again, that one is slightly more blue-toned. So for color reference, I think the closest kind of shade to color match is Holo Taco's Electric Sweetener, which again, obviously is a very different formula, but just color-wise, it's the closest. Maybe it's a little darker. I personally don't think Gummy Bear is close to Cirque's Guilty Pleasure, which is their neon purple, or one of their neon purples. That one is just much darker overall. Honestly, not really reading as a neon to me personally, but either way, it's also more cool toned or blue toned. So when it came to this warmer red tone purple, I thought of Mooncat's Lost Polaroids, but since I don't have that one to compare directly, my best guess is that Lost Polaroids is a little bit more pink, but it's just the closest in this range. And lastly, for Shortcake, I first wanted to show this next to Cirque's Shopaholic, which was one of their Vice pinks from 2, maybe 3 years ago. I can't tell if my bottle is beginning to fade because I feel like it's not as neon as Shortcake, but it is also just a lighter shade of pink, so either way, not dupes. For some ILNP neon pinks, I have Two-Piece, which is the cream on the left, and Sorbet, which is the neon pink jelly on the right. But as I'm sure you can tell, both of the ILNP shades are just darker, hot pink colors by comparison, so definitely not dupes either. I thought the closest shade that I had in my collection was China Glaze's Will That Be Cup or Cone from a summer collection a couple of years ago that was like quickly retired shortly after it launched. Similar to previous comparisons, these look like dupes in the bottle, but on the nail, the China Glaze is a little bit more of this crelly kind of formula, so it's just not as pigmented in its base, though I think doing a third coat helps make it a little closer, but it's just not quite there. My best guess for a close dupe is Cirque's Valley of the Dolls, which is another Vice pink, which I believe they brought back just last year. Unfortunately, my bottle from 2020 faded severely, but yeah, the original color I think is super close. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons of Prism Parade's upcoming Sugar Rush collection. As always, I would love to know what you think of this release because I thought it was so fun. I love seeing neons this early in the year because we usually get them in the summer, so it's nice to see a neon lineup for the spring. It's just more refreshing. And while I always love a rainbow lineup and this color palette is just so perfect, formula-wise, I wasn't super in love with all of them. As you heard in my review during the live swatch portion, I found most of these to be 2 to 3 coaters depending on your application. I know personally I am a bit more heavy-handed, but if I were to do thinner coats, which I think might work better for these formulas, I could see the majority of these being 3 coaters just to make sure everything is evened out, there aren't any dark spots. And personally, when it comes to creams, I prefer my creams to be on the very creamy side of the formula as opposed to being slightly more crelly-ish. So I didn't love the yellow and the green in this lineup, but I know that those are also not my favorite colors to begin with, especially in this like neon colorway. Not usually something I would go for, but I would use them in nail art, which I think these are still really good for because they are still so highly pigmented. But as I kind of said already, my favorites are the pink and the coral. But even with those, I feel like I wouldn't recommend those as much as the blue or the purple because I felt like those had the best formulas. Not to say the others were bad, but you know, just not my preference. But I would love to know what you think of these. If you do love them, they are going to be launching this coming Friday, March 27th. So I will have Prism Parade's website linked down below. And as a reminder, I'm also an affiliate with Prism Parade. So if you do want to shop these while supporting me and my channel, you can use my link in the description box or my discount code to save 10% off your order. As always, a big thank you to all of you who do support me through that. But even if you don't plan on picking any of them up, I would still love to know which ones are your favorites or just your thoughts down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!